Everyone thought I was jealous of my sister Emily. She had the life everyone envied, the husband, the house, the endless stream of praise. People smiled at me with sympathy, disguised as politeness, and I learned to smile back, pretending it didn't sting. But that night at dinner, when Daniel's fork hit his plate and his voice broke the quiet hum of conversation, I knew something was about to unravel. "I can't keep lying anymore," he said, his voice shaking. Every laugh, every toast, every illusion of family perfection shattered like thin glass. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Because the secret he carried wasn't just his, it was mine, too. Would you forgive your sister if she turned everyone against you? Would you still protect her if her husband loved you first? What would you do if telling the truth meant destroying your entire family? The room fell still after Daniel's words. My heart pounded, but my body wouldn't move. Emily blinked, her smile gone, her hand frozen mid-air. My parents stared at him, waiting for the kind of confession that belonged to someone else's family, not ours. He looked at me once before he spoke again, and in that moment, I knew it was over. Every lie, every glance, every silence was about to be dragged into the light. I'd spent months holding this secret like a wound I refused to show. But Daniel's voice cracked it open for everyone to see. Emily's voice broke the silence first. Sharp, brittle, desperate. She demanded to know what he meant, her words tripping over themselves in panic. Daniel couldn't meet her eyes. He just said, "She deserves the truth." My stomach twisted. Every pair of eyes turned toward me, searching for answers I didn't want to give. And in that moment, I realized that secrets don't protect anyone. They just delay the destruction. My mother whispered my name, soft and trembling, as if saying it could erase what was happening. But my father's face hardened, not with anger, but with disappointment that didn't need words. Emily was crying now, mascara streaking, begging Daniel to stop. I wanted to vanish, to escape the weight pressing down on the room. But part of me, the part that had lived in her shadow, felt an unfamiliar calm. The truth was cruel, but finally, it was mine too. When Daniel finally spoke, it wasn't an excuse. It was an admission. It wasn't jealousy, he said quietly. It was me. My sister gasped like she'd been struck. My mother covered her mouth. My father stood up, but the weight of what had been said held everyone in place. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I just watched as every lie we'd built collapsed into the silence between us. Maybe I wasn't jealous after all. Maybe I was just done pretending. Emily's cry broke the silence like glass hitting the floor. The room that had once smelled of rosemary and candle wax now reeked of betrayal. She stood there, shaking, demanding answers that Daniel couldn't give. Not without tearing her heart apart. My parents sat frozen, their faces twisted in disbelief. I wanted to speak, to tell Emily that I never meant for any of this to happen. But my voice felt locked somewhere behind guilt and shame. The air around us grew heavier with every second of silence. Daniel's words hung there, thick and final. A confession that had no undoing. And as I looked at Emily, I realized that love had never been a sin. Silence had. Emily's anger came next. Wild, raw, desperate. She shouted things she could never take back, her words slicing through the air like shards of ice. My mother tried to calm her, but it only made her louder. She accused me of stealing her life, her happiness, her husband. I didn't defend myself. I just sat there, watching her unravel under the same weight that had crushed me in silence for so long. I could see Daniel trying to speak, but there were no words left to save any of us. Every secret we'd buried was now exposed, and there was no going back. families break quietly until they don't. I left the table before anyone could stop me. The house felt smaller as I walked through it, the walls echoing with the chaos behind me. I could still hear Emily's sobs, my father's voice trying to make sense of it all, and my mother's prayers whispered into her trembling hands. Outside, the air was cold, sharp enough to sting but soft enough to remind me that I was still alive. For the first time, I didn't feel like the jealous sister. I felt like a ghost finally seen, even if being seen meant being hated. Sometimes the truth doesn't free you. It just burns the walls that kept you safe. Daniel followed me out minutes later. His footsteps on the porch were hesitant, soft, like a man walking toward the edge of something he couldn't undo. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. His voice was quiet, almost pleading, saying he never meant for any of this to happen, that he thought he could love us both differently. The night wind swallowed his words before they reached me. I wanted to scream, to tell him that love without honesty is just a prettier kind of lie. But all I managed to whisper was, "You should go back inside." And for once, he listened. When I finally went back inside, the candles had burned down to stubs. My parents sat in silence, their faces drained, their eyes refusing to meet mine. Emily was gone, her chair pushed back, her glass tipped over. Daniel sat with his head in his hands, whispering something I couldn't hear. I walked past them, past the plates, past the shattered picture, perfect evening, and stopped at the door. Families don't collapse all at once. They crumble piece by piece until you realize there's nothing left to hold together. I closed the door softly behind me, not as an ending, but as the only mercy left. Emily didn't come home that night. My mother called her phone until her voice broke. My father drove the streets in silence, and Daniel just sat on the porch, staring into nothing. I stayed in my room, the guilt pressing against my ribs like a second heartbeat. Every sound in the house felt too loud. The ticking clock, the wind brushing against the window, my mother's quiet sobs through the wall. Emily was gone, and somehow everyone believed it was my fault. Maybe it was. Secrets always come with a price, and ours had just been cashed in. I thought telling the truth would set something right, but instead, it turned everything inside out. By morning, Emily's car was found near the lake, empty. The police were calm, methodical, but their questions cut deeper than any accusation. When was the last time you saw her? Did you argue? Was she upset? Each word made me smaller. My father stood behind me, stone-faced, while my mother whispered prayers under her breath. Daniel's voice cracked when he gave his statement, but he never once looked at me. And in that silence, I realized this wasn't just a missing person case. It was a family being dissected, one truth at a time. The house turned quiet after the police left. My mother stayed in Emily's room, folding her clothes like she might come home any second. My father kept his anger buried, but I could see it simmering every time his eyes met mine. Daniel avoided everyone. I caught him once in the hallway, and for a moment, it looked like he wanted to say something. But then he just walked past me. The truth had done what it always does. It broke everything it touched. And now, all we could do was wait for someone who might never come back. That night, I found Daniel sitting by the lake again, staring at the dark water. He looked broken, not like a man hiding guilt, but like one swallowed by it. I asked him if he thought she'd come back. He didn't answer. The wind was cold, carrying the smell of rain and the echo of things we never should have said. For the first time, I saw him not as Emily's husband, not as my secret, but as someone trapped in his own ruin. Maybe we all were. Families don't survive the truth. They just learn to live among the ruins it leaves behind. When the call finally came 2 days later, no one moved at first. My mother's hands shook as she answered. My father closed his eyes like he already knew. Emily was alive. Found at a friend's cabin outside town. Safe, but refusing to come home. Relief and dread collided inside me. She was safe, but what waited next wasn't forgiveness. It was reckoning. And as my parents cried with relief, I sat there in silence, wondering if survival was just another kind of punishment for the ones left behind. 3 days after the call, Emily came home. She didn't warn anyone. She just walked through the front door like nothing had happened, except everything had. My mother froze mid-step. My father stood from his chair. And Daniel, he couldn't even look at her. Emily's eyes were swollen, her face pale and distant, like she'd left a part of herself somewhere out in the dark. When she finally looked at me, I saw nothing familiar there. No love, no hate, just something hollow. And I realized this wasn't forgiveness. It was the calm before the storm, the kind that doesn't end quietly. Dinner that night was quiet, too quiet. No one mentioned the past week, though every silence screamed with what wasn't being said. Emily barely touched her food, her gaze heavy and unreadable. My parents tried to pretend things were normal, asking about work, about the weather, about anything that wasn't us. Daniel kept his head down. I could feel Emily's eyes on me, sharp as glass, studying every breath I took. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, too calm. "It must be nice," she said, "having everyone feel sorry for you." And just like that, I knew forgiveness wasn't on the menu. After dinner, Emily found me in the kitchen. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed, her voice low and cutting. She said she'd thought a lot about what happened, about why it happened. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Her eyes told me she already knew everything she wanted to know. "You took something that wasn't yours," she said. "And I'm not talking about him." I looked at her then, realizing she wasn't angry about Daniel anymore. She was angry about the years I spent being invisible beside her light. It wasn't about love. It was about being seen. And now, she was done pretending not to see me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I heard voices downstairs, my parents whispering, Daniel pacing, Emily's tone cold and steady. She was telling them she wanted to move out, start over. My mother cried softly, begging her not to go. My father stayed silent, and Daniel, he didn't stop her. I sat at the top of the stairs, hidden in the dark, listening to my family crumble again. I thought the truth had already destroyed us, but I was wrong. The real damage wasn't in what was said. It was in what was left unsaid after. When the door closed behind her, the silence was unbearable. My mother broke down in my father's arms. Daniel left soon after, without a word. I stood in the hallway, staring at the empty doorway, feeling the echo of everything we'd lost. Emily was gone again, but this time, it felt final, not an escape, a goodbye. I wondered if we'd ever been a family, or just people pretending until the truth tore the script apart. Sometimes love isn't enough to save what's broken. Sometimes it's the reason it breaks. Weeks passed without a word from Emily. My mother called every day, leaving messages that went unanswered. My father threw himself into work, trying to drown the silence. Daniel moved out, saying he needed space, but everyone knew space was just another word for escape. And me? I stayed behind in a house that no longer felt like home. Every corner carried her absence. Every sound reminded me of what I'd taken, or what she'd lost. I started writing letters I'd never send, hoping words could somehow rebuild what truth had destroyed. But no matter how many times I tried, every apology came out feeling smaller than the hurt I'd caused. Then one morning, Emily finally called. My mother answered, and her sobs echoed through the house before I could even reach the hallway. Emily wanted to meet, not all of us, just me. I stood there, frozen, my heart beating so loud it drowned her words. After everything, she wanted to see me. I didn't know if it was forgiveness or something far more dangerous. My father told me not to go, but I had to. Sometimes closure isn't a choice. It's a debt that keeps calling your name until you answer. We met at a quiet cafe outside town. The same one we used to go to as kids when things were simpler, when love wasn't something that could ruin you. Emily was already there when I arrived. She looked different, calmer, older somehow, but her eyes still carried that fire. We sat without speaking for a long time. When she finally looked up, her words were soft but heavy. "I don't hate you," she said, "but I'll never be the same because of you." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something close enough to breathe again. And for the first time, I felt the ache of what healing really costs. Emily told me she was moving, not far, but far enough to start again. She said Daniel had tried to call her, but she didn't answer. "He's yours now," she said simply, though we both knew he wasn't anyone's anymore. I wanted to tell her that I didn't want him, that what I wanted was the sister I'd lost long before any of this began. But words failed me. Some wounds don't close. They just stop bleeding. And in her quiet, I heard the sound of something ending. Something that once felt unbreakable. That night, I sat on my porch watching the streetlights flicker against the dark. My phone buzzed, a text from Emily. "Take care of Mom." Nothing more. Just 3 words, but they carried the weight of a lifetime. I stared at the screen until the light dimmed and the night grew quiet again. Maybe some stories don't end with forgiveness. Maybe they end with understanding. The kind that hurts but heals in its own way. I looked up at the stars and whispered her name, hoping she'd feel it wherever she was. Maybe that was enough. I hadn't seen Daniel in months. Then, one evening, he showed up on my doorstep like a ghost who'd lost his way home. He looked thinner, older, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. I almost didn't let him in. But something in his eyes stopped me. He said he'd tried to reach Emily, but she never responded. He wanted to apologize, not just for her, but for me, for everything. Hearing his voice again felt like reopening an old wound I thought had scarred over. I didn't know if I hated him or pitied him, but I knew one thing for sure. His apology came too late. Some truths don't fade. They just wait. We sat in silence for a long time. Daniel looked around the room like it was filled with ghosts. Maybe it was. He said he'd been sober for months, that he was trying to start over. But everywhere he went, people still whispered about what happened. I listened, saying nothing. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were soft. "Do you ever think about what we could have been?" he asked. I didn't answer, because the truth was, yes, I had. But I'd buried those thoughts beneath guilt and regret where they belonged. Love doesn't always die cleanly. Sometimes it just sits quietly, waiting for you to remember what it cost. Then he told me something I wasn't ready for. He said Emily had reached out to him weeks ago. Before me, before anyone, she told him she forgave him, but she couldn't forgive herself for what she'd done to me. My chest tightened as he spoke. Emily had always been the one people pitied, but maybe she carried more guilt than any of us realized. Daniel said she'd left him a message, one he hadn't played until that morning. It was her voice, soft but trembling, saying, "Tell her I understand now." I didn't know what she meant, but it broke something inside me anyway. Sometimes peace doesn't come from answers, just from knowing the pain was shared. Daniel left not long after. He said he was moving to another city, a place where no one knew his name, where starting over didn't mean explaining everything first. I watched him walk down the street until he disappeared into the dark. Part of me wanted to call him back, to tell him that forgiveness doesn't have to be shared to be real. But I didn't. I just stood there, listening to the quiet hum of the streetlights and the wind brushing past the trees. For the first time, it didn't hurt. It just was. Maybe that was the beginning of peace. Not forgetting, not fixing, just accepting. Later that night, I found one of Emily's old letters in my drawer, one I'd never opened. It was short, just a few lines written in her neat, careful handwriting. Maybe we both wanted to be seen. Maybe that was our mistake. I read it again and again, feeling the weight of every word settle into my chest. For the first time, I didn't feel angry or guilty, just human. Families don't heal all at once. They heal in fragments, in quiet moments like this, when the truth finally stops hurting and starts to make sense. I folded the letter and smiled through the ache. Maybe that was her way of saying goodbye. A year later, the house felt quieter, lighter somehow. My mother had started tending the garden again. My father spent mornings fixing small things around the house, and I learned to breathe without guilt pressing down on my chest. Sometimes, I still thought about Daniel, about what could have been, but the ache had dulled into something distant, almost gentle. Emily and I spoke occasionally, small messages that said more in silence than words ever could. Families never return to what they were. They just find new ways to exist, and maybe that's enough. Not perfect, not whole, just enough. I saw Emily again that spring. We met at our parents' house. Neutral ground. The air was full of lilac and old memories. She looked different, softer, calmer, like someone who'd finally found the edges of her own peace. When she hugged me, it wasn't tight or desperate. It was real, she whispered. We both made mistakes, Lil. Let's not make them forever. I nodded, unable to speak. The past was still between us, but now it felt smaller, like something that could finally be left behind without guilt following too close behind it. That evening, after she left, I found myself in her old room. It still smelled faintly of her perfume, that floral scent that lingered long after she was gone. The walls were bare now, but traces of her laughter seemed etched into the air. I sat on the bed and whispered the words I never had the courage to say aloud. I'm sorry. It wasn't just for Daniel. It was for the years I let jealousy fill the spaces love should have lived. The apology floated into the quiet, and for the first time, I believed she heard it. Life didn't go back to perfect. It just went on. My parents aged quietly. Daniel stayed gone. And Emily found her own life far from here. But sometimes, we'd still meet for coffee and talk about everything except the past. Those were the best moments, when silence wasn't heavy anymore, when love didn't feel dangerous. Maybe the truth hadn't destroyed us after all. Maybe it had just shown us who we really were beneath the pretending. Families don't always heal cleanly, but they do find their way back, even if it's through the cracks. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about that dinner. The night everything fell apart. But instead of pain, I feel gratitude, because that night stripped us bare, forced us to see the parts of ourselves we'd hidden behind love and pride. We broke, yes, but we also began again. I think that's what family really means. Not perfection, not forgiveness, but choosing to love each other after the truth has burned everything else away. And when I close my eyes, I can still hear Emily's voice, calm and distant, saying, "We're okay now." For once, I believe her.